When AC Milan won the 21-22 Serie A title, their manager Stefano Pioli said, "Anyone who said we weren't good enough knows all." That's me. I know all, because I thought AC Milan wouldn't win the Serie A title. So on the board in front of me, I have AC Milan as they played last season. Nice and simple, 4-2-3-1, but quite different to a lot of 4-2-3-1s that you'll see, because AC Milan are really strong loaded to the left-hand side. We have these two players here in Rafael Leao and Theo Hernandez. These two players are super fun players. Rafael Leao can play as a wide player, he can come inside, and so can Theo Hernandez. He's also going to run on this really aggressive line towards the box. And again, if Leao goes inside, then he can go around the outside. Now in the midfield, actually you'd be surprised at how little creativity necessarily they're looking for there. On this formation, we have got Brahim Diaz, who plays as a classic 10. But actually, even at times this season, we've seen Frank Kessie even play as a 10. Kessie isn't known as being a particularly creative player. But this midfield now that you can see of Tonali, Benasso and Kessie, really solid. So a lot of that is to do with the fact that they're really keen on being solid through the middle and then breaking at speed and directly through their left-hand side. And then centre-back wise, they've got Fikayo Tomori, who everyone knows from England. Simon Kjaer played for most of the season but then got injured, and Kalulu over here subbed in for him. We'll talk a little bit about him more later. So the reason why people thought Milan wouldn't end up taking the title home is because actually if you looked at their underlying numbers, they were far from impressive. In terms of expected goals, they were about 4th on the table, and they were a long way behind Inter, their rivals across the city. About 20 expected goals differentiated them. They were much better in terms of the expected goals against, but again, they were 2nd on the table behind Napoli. So if you looked at those numbers, it didn't really suggest that they were a team who were doing anything special. So when the Serie A title race went into last 10 games where they had 4 teams all vying for the title, it just looked nailed on that Inter would power through and would take the title home. But actually, if we look at the table for those last 10 games, just a few interesting things do show up. So I've got 5 teams here, and I've sorted these teams by goals against. So this is the number of goals that were conceded in the league in the last 10 games of Serie A. And as you can see, Milan just the standout team here. 2 goals conceded across 10 games, remarkable, and that was a lot to do with why they ended up taking their title home. Now, you may look over at the expected goals against column here and say, 6.55, they've overperformed to the tune of about 4.5 expected goals. That's true, but there's also a big gap between themselves and Roma and also Inter. And then just before we move on, the expected goals for column, again, Inter are miles ahead of everyone else, but as you can see, Milan much closer to tracking them in terms of their expected goals numbers, and they are comfortably ahead of the other teams there. So what we're seeing is an improvement both in terms of the expected goals against and the expected goals for. And as a result, when you look at the expected goal difference column here, you can see that actually it's Inter and it's Milan who are the 2 standout teams. And so in the last 10 games of the season, you can see that Milan have really improved in terms of the goals conceded side of things, and they've improved a little bit in terms of the goals scored side of things. And I think that's why I got Milan so wrong, because I think it's a lot easier to see when a team is doing well, when they're doing well in possession of the ball, rather than when they're doing well because they're doing well out of possession of the ball defensively. So the first thing I want to talk about with respect to Milan's out of possession stuff is the aggressive pressing system that they play. Now, before we get to AC Milan, we do need to talk a little bit of the theory, so do bear with me. But in general, all aggressive pressing systems can be boiled down to one of 2 categories. On the one hand, you have ball-oriented pressing systems, and on the other hand, you have man-oriented pressing systems. Now, when it comes to man-oriented pressing systems, what's most important is that you get coverage across the pitch. So what you're going to try and do is get all of your players into 1v1 battles across the pitch, make it hard for the team of the opposition to get into any sort of settled possession, and in so doing, just make it really hard for them to build up. Now, the most famous man-oriented pressing system is Marcelo Bielsa's man-marking system. So let's just take a quick look at that. So I've got this on the board in front of me, and as you can see, across the field, Leeds have got players in 1v1 battles. So all the way across the field here, you've got 1v1 battles, apart from in 2 specific areas. The first is the centre-back area, and as you can see here, I've got Diego Llorente and Liam Cooper, and they're both responsible for this lone striker. And the reason for that is because Marcelo Bielsa wants to make sure that he's got just an extra player, a free man who can patrol alongside the other centre-back and make sure that if there's anything that's coming through, they can sweep it up. Now, obviously that spare man has to come from somewhere, and Marcelo Bielsa takes that spare man from as far away from his goal as possible, so he takes it away from the front line. So you can see then the other area where there isn't a 1v1 battle is up front. So 2 players here in the centre-back area for the opposition, and Patrick Bamford's job is to make sure he covers both of those players. Now the issue is that automatically creates a weakness that the opposition are then going to try and exploit. So the area you could do this in is build up. So let's say that the ball is back with the goalkeeper. Now, because Bamford is between these 2 players, the opposition team are going to try and spread their centre-backs as far as possible, create as much space for Bamford to have to cover. So that if the ball is played to this centre-back here, Pat Bamford comes across here, and then you can either do one of 2 things. You can either play the ball in here, to the goalkeeper, who can then find this centre-back, or you could play an anticipatory pass in here to this player who's dropping back, losing his marker, and then playing the ball across. But the general principle is that you're trying to get the ball to this free centre-back, and then once that free centre-back has the ball, we can then see him running with the ball along this line, generating space. Now, obviously, the players in front of them are attached to their markers, so smart players will move out of the way and pull their marking responsibilities with them. And again, that just creates more space to be attacked. Now in this situation, Mateusz Klich is faced with a bit of a problem, because he could see this centre-back who's advancing with the ball and think, he's just going to carry on advancing into this space. I'm going to have to do something about it. So he may move across here to try and intercept this player, but now the free player has moved into this area. And so this is the one weakness of a man-oriented system, in that it actually becomes very easy to manipulate where your players are. You can create spaces, you can pull players around, and you can actually cause a lot of problems. And that was what was happening a lot for Leeds in the last season. Let's talk about ball-oriented pressing systems now, because the difference between a ball-oriented system and a man-oriented system is that where a man-oriented system is trying to get coverage across the field, a ball-oriented system is much more concerned of making chaos around the ball itself and breaking down the possession in that way. And so you don't worry too much about making sure every man is covered, you just make sure that you have congestion, chaos, madness around the ball itself. So the famous teams for ball-oriented systems are the Red Bull teams usually. So I've got RB Leipzig from 2016 under Ralph Hasenhüttl on the board in front of me. This is a really fun team. And as you can see, you've got lots of compaction in the central area, so if the ball goes into the middle, you can all fall on the ball and cause problems there. Now, in terms of the build-up phase, what the general principle here is that you want to try and force the ball onto one side of the pitch or the other. So you're going to divide the pitch in half, you're going to try and get the ball onto this side, force it into an area such as here, where you can then fall into these sort of pressing traps where you can cause lots of problems. And what we'll see is something like this. The ball is passed to the centre-back, and that will trigger Yusuf Poulsen to push into this space here, a curved run, so he can get into this line here, and he's closing the passing lane across back to the other centre-back. Now that means that you're almost forcing the opposition to play the ball into this side of the field. So the natural pass then is here, and that's a triggering pass for this player here to push out and pressure that player. And what we'll see, as soon as the ball's moved into this area, all of the Red Bull players are going to push into this area here. You're going to try and squeeze into this side of the pitch to make it as small as possible. Now again, the natural pass here is to this player dropping out down the line, and then suddenly you're in a situation where you can start having this counter press, where all of these players around the ball here can press to the ball, and you're not worrying too much about the coverage, so you've got players free on the other side of the pitch. The general idea is you just want to fall onto the ball as quickly as possible and cause all of these problems so that this player cannot play the ball back and you will end up losing the ball here. Now the problem with this system is that if you come up against a team who are really, really elite at press resistance, what they're going to be able to do is play through this press, maybe find this player here who can see this player in free space over here and launch a pass into this side of the field, and then suddenly all of your players who are compact on one side have to move over to the other side and there's space to attack here. So both systems here have a problem. As we saw with the man-oriented system, it becomes really easy to pull around and create space. But when it comes to the ball-oriented system, it's very easy for you to have your press broken and then suddenly you're open on one side of the pitch to the other. So when it comes to AC Milan, when you look at their setup out of possession, actually looks very similar to a man-oriented system, because you can see across the field we've got 1v1 battles all over the place. A few things to notice. There are similarities to the lead system. So, for example, we've got the 2 centre-backs here on the 1 striker. So we have a free man at the back. But rather than having the weakness being in the front line, it's actually slightly different. Rather than Giroud being responsible for these 2 centre-backs, it's actually Rafael Leao who's responsible for the centre-back and the full-back. So we're moving that weakness from the back line into the side of the pitch. And so what you've got here is a really nice system. If the ball's shelled long, you've got your back line all sorted out. But as soon as the ball is played out, and as they try and play out from the back, that's going to trigger a run from Rafael Leao to close him down. Now, obviously, that is going to leave this player as the free player. And so as soon as Leao starts moving along this line, that's going to trigger a run from Frank Kessie towards the fullback to make sure that he's not free. But obviously, when you're doing that, you're then moving the free man from here to here, and this player is free. And this is where the free man comes in, because Tomori is going to come all the way up the pitch here and close this free man here. So what we start seeing is strings of pressing actions where the ball is chased around the pitch in such a way that you don't lose your structure in the same way that you might do with a more ball-oriented focus. So you've got the best of both worlds here. You've got man-to-man, but also a way of having a more dynamic press that can cause problems as the ball is moved around the field. And so that's why AC Milan were really elite out of possession. Their pressing system was on point. By the end of the season, they were barely giving up any chances on goal. The other area that I want to talk about is called rest defense. Now, rest defense is a phrase that comes from a German phrase, Restverteidigung, which is translated as rest defense. Now, the problem with this concept is that when an English person hears the word rest, they usually think of chilling out or relaxing. And that's not really what rest means. Actually, a better word that you can use to describe what the concept is getting at is the idea of remainders or leftovers. So to explain what rest defense is, we just need to think a little bit about what attacking is. When we're attacking as a football team, obviously we're putting players close towards the goal as possible. And the more players that we have near the goal, the easier it is going to be to score. Now, obviously you don't attack with all of your players, so there'll be some players left over, and that's the leftover of the rest defense. What do you do with those players that are left over? Now, there's a conundrum here because obviously, as we've said, the more players you attack with, the more likely you are to score. But if the opposition turns the ball over, the more likely you are to concede. And so rest defense is all about how you structure the players who you have left over and how many players you commit to the attack. And this is another area where I think AC Milan got really good last season, particularly in the last 10 games. So this is a game against Fiorentina at the end of last season. We've got the ball over here on the left-hand side because, as we've already said, these 2 players, Theo Hernandez and Rafael Leao, are the really exciting players that Milan have in an attacking sense. So this worked really well for Milan through most of the season because they had these 2 elite players who could generate goals out of nowhere. But as the season wore on, oppositions were much better at doing things to stop them from being great. And so Milan had to do something to try and generate more chances. And the way they did that was actually using this out of possession aspect of rest defense that we've just talked about. So before, their rest defense was probably these 2 centre-backs, maybe Calabria here just dropping a little bit deeper to give a little bit of solidity and to balance off the fact that Theo Hernandez is moving up here. And then you've got these 2 pivot players here who can help out as well, both really athletic guys who can press really well. Simon Kjaer is a great centre-back, but he is not a rapid centre-back, and Pierre Kalulu is. And so if you look at these 2 centre-backs now, we have Kalulu and Tomori, both of whom are really, really elite at what I call backwards defending. So that's defending back towards your own goal. Now, if you have players who are really good at that kind of action, running back and stopping these players from causing any problems, then you can actually commit more players forward into your attack. And so what we started seeing was Tonali drifting in here, maybe the other centre midfielder going a little bit more central. You could see Calabria coming here to find the ball in the box as well. So with this little tweak in their rest defense, being able to commit more players forward, Milan were actually able to generate more chances in the second part of the season. And so it's because of this, these 2 areas of out of possession football that we've looked at, that Milan were able to be really elite going into the last 10 games of the season. And that's how they ended up winning Serie A, proving me wrong in the process.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is where the Ralph Rangnick to Manchester United story broke, where a team of journalists have provided unrivaled coverage of Newcastle United's new ownership, and where dedicated writers cover every Premier League team no matter their place in the table. And you can try it free now for 30 days.